The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune in the nearly empty marketing floor of Henderson Associates. I glanced at my watch at 4:47 p.m. The cleaning crew wouldn't arrive for another hour, and I was determined to finish this quarterly analysis before tomorrow's presentation. My fingers moved mechanically across the keyboard, the soft clicking echoing in the silence that had settled over our open-plan office. Like a heavy blanket, I'd always been the type to stay late, not because I was particularly ambitious, but because I genuinely enjoyed the quiet focus that came after everyone else had packed up their lives and headed home to families, dinner plans, and Netflix binges. At 26, I didn't have much waiting for me in my studio apartment, except leftover Chinese food and the nagging feeling that I should be doing something more meaningful with my evenings. The sound of heels clicking against the polished concrete floors made me look up from my screen. Sarah Martinez was walking toward my desk, a steaming mug in her hands, and that slight smile she wore when she was about to say something she wasn't entirely sure she should say. "You're still here too," she said, settling her coffee down on Mike's empty desk beside mine. I thought I was the only workaholic left in this place. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly aware that I'd been hunched over my laptop for the better part of 3 hours. Sarah looked as put together as she had at 9 a.m. Dark blazer still crisp, her shoulder-length black hair still perfectly in place. But there was something different about her demeanor now. Something softer around the edges that only appeared after business hours. "Just trying to get this market analysis wrapped up," I said, gesturing at my screen full of charts and pivot tables. "Henderson wants it first thing tomorrow, and I'm still not happy with the consumer behavior section." She moved around to look at my screen, and I caught a hint of her perfume, something subtle and expensive that made me more aware of how close she was standing. "Mind if I take a look? Consumer psychology is kind of my thing." I scooted my chair over to make room, trying not to notice how naturally she filled the space beside me. Sarah had been my project manager for about 8 months, ever since I'd joined Henderson Associates fresh out of grad school. She was 8 years older than me, recently promoted to senior management, and had a reputation for being brilliant, but slightly intimidating. Most of the junior staff found her hard-to-read professional to a fault, always composed, rarely revealing anything personal. But right now, leaning over my laptop with her coffee warming the air between us, she seemed different, more human somehow. "Your data's solid," she said after scanning through my analysis, "but you're thinking about this too linearly. Consumer behavior isn't just about demographics and spending patterns. It's about emotional triggers, about what makes people feel understood." She pointed at a particular chart. "This segment here, they're not just buying premium products because they have disposable income. They're buying them because they want to feel like they deserve nice things. There's loneliness in that purchasing pattern." I found myself studying her profile as she talked, the way her brow furrowed slightly when she was thinking, the way her voice took on a different cadence when she was explaining something she was passionate about. There was something almost vulnerable in the way she talked about loneliness, as if she was speaking from experience rather than just professional expertise. "That's actually brilliant," I said, already seeing how I could restructure the entire section around emotional drivers rather than just statistical correlations. "I've been looking at this all wrong." She straightened up, but didn't move away from my desk. Instead, she perched on the edge of Mike's chair, cradling her coffee mug in both hands. "It's easy to miss the emotional component when you're drowning. In spreadsheets, I do it too sometimes. Get so caught up in the numbers that I forget there are actual people behind all that data." There was something in her tone that made me look at her more carefully. In all our project meetings and professional interactions, Sarah had never revealed anything this personal. She was known for being laser-focused, results-driven, the kind of manager who could dissect a marketing strategy with surgical precision, but rarely talked about anything beyond quarterly projections and campaign metrics. "Is that why you stay late so often?" I asked, then immediately wondered if I was overstepping some professional boundary. "I mean, I've noticed your office light is usually still on when I leave." She was quiet for a moment, staring into her coffee as if it might contain the answer to some question she'd been avoiding. "Partly," she said finally. It's easier to think clearly when the phones stop ringing and people stop needing things. From you, every 5 minutes. She paused, then added more quietly and honestly. Going home to an empty house doesn't feel that much different from staying here sometimes. The admission hung in the air between us, surprising us both. I could see her processing what she'd just revealed. It's a slight flush creeping up her neck, as if she was realizing she'd said more than she intended. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, setting down her coffee and starting to stand. "You don't need to." "Hear about my personal—" "No, it's okay," I said, and I meant it. "I get it, actually. My apartment's pretty quiet, too." She settled back into Mike's chair, and I saw some of the tension leave her shoulders. "I didn't realize you lived alone. Most people your age have roommates. Or ... someone had roommates all through college," I said. "I guess I thought living alone would feel more grown up, more independent. Turns out it mostly just feels ... quiet." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of our mutual admissions creating an unexpected intimacy in the sterile office environment. I was acutely aware of how different this conversation was from any we'd had before. How the professional distance we usually maintained had somehow evaporated in the after-hours emptiness of the office. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said, her voice thoughtful. "I spent so much energy trying to get promoted, trying to prove I belonged in senior management. And now that I'm here, I realize how isolating it can be. You can't really be friends with the people you manage, and you can't really confide in your peers because everyone's competing for the same next level up." I found myself leaning forward, drawn into her honesty. "That sounds lonely." "It is," she said simply. "Especially when—" She trailed off, then shook her head as if deciding against finishing the thought. "When what?" She looked at me directly. Then, her dark eyes holding mine in a way that felt significant, weighted with meaning I couldn't quite decode. "Especially when everything else in your life is falling apart too." I wanted to ask what she meant by everything else falling apart. But something in her expression warned me that we were approaching territory that might be too personal, too intimate for a late-night office conversation between a manager and her subordinate. Instead, I found myself saying, "If it helps at all, you don't seem like you're falling apart from where I'm sitting. You always seem so ... together." She laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "That's the job, isn't it? Look competent. Stay composed. Never let them see you sweat." Some days I feel like I'm just really good at playing a character called Senior Project Manager Sarah Martinez. And who are you when you're not playing that character? The question slipped out before I could stop myself, and I immediately felt heat rise in my cheeks. We were definitely venturing into territory that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or professional development. But instead of shutting down the conversation or reminding me about appropriate workplace boundaries, Sarah tilted her head and considered the question seriously. "I'm not sure I remember anymore," she said softly. "I think I used to be someone who laughed more, someone who didn't analyze every conversation for hidden meanings or political implications, someone who—" She paused, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city lights below. "Someone who didn't eat dinner alone every night while reviewing budget projections." The vulnerability in her voice did something to my chest, made it feel tight and warm at the same time. I had the sudden, overwhelming urge to tell her that she didn't have to eat dinner alone, that I ate most of my meals in front of my laptop anyway. We could be alone together if that would help either of us feel less isolated, but that was definitely crossing a line I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. "For what it's worth," I said instead, "I think the real Sarah Martinez is probably more interesting than the professional version." She looked at me with surprise, as if she hadn't expected such directness. "What makes you say that? It's the way you just explained consumer psychology to me? You didn't just recite textbook theories, you understood the emotional component because you've felt it. It's not something you can learn from a business degree. That's empathy, insight, actual human understanding." Something shifted in her expression, a softness that transformed her face in a way that made my pulse quicken. "You're very observant for someone so young." "I'm 26, not 16, I said, with just enough edge to let her know I'd caught the subtle dismissal in her words. "You're right, I'm sorry. That was ... She shook her head. I think I use your age as a way to maintain some kind of professional distance. It's not fair to you. Why do you feel like you need professional distance from me specifically?" The question hung between us, heavy with implications neither of us was quite ready to address directly. I watched her process it, saw the moment. When she realized that answering honestly might change something fundamental about our working relationship. She was quiet for so long that I started to worry I'd pushed too far, asked too much. But then she set down her coffee mug and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "David," she said, and something about the way she said my name made my stomach flutter. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise me it won't make things weird between us." "Okay," I said, though I wasn't sure I meant it. "I look forward to these late nights when it's just us working on projects. It's more than I probably should, more than is entirely professional." She took a shaky breath. "And I think that scares me. Because I don't want to be the kind of manager who takes advantage of your not taking advantage of anything. If anything, I've been hoping for more opportunities to work with you one-on-one." The admission surprised us both. I saw something kindle in her eyes, something that made the air between us feel charged with possibility. "Really? Really?" These late-night sessions are usually the highlight of my week. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her entire face. Mine too. We sat there looking at each other, both of us aware that we'd just acknowledged something that complicated our professional relationship in ways we'd have to figure out later. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of the empty office, it felt like the most honest conversation I'd had in months. "I should probably let you get back to your analysis," she said, but she made no move to leave. "Actually," I heard myself saying, "would you mind staying and helping me rework this consumer psychology section? I think I could use your insight on the emotional triggers you mentioned." She glanced at her watch. It was already past 9, then looked back at me. For a moment I thought she was going to decline, to retreat back into professional boundaries and appropriate manager-subordinate distance. Instead, she said quietly, "Don't leave yet. I need you here." The words hit me like a physical force, so loaded with meaning that went far beyond project collaboration. My heart started beating faster, and I found myself holding her gaze in a way that felt significant, like we were communicating something important without saying it directly. "I was hoping you'd say that," I replied. My voice came out lower than I'd intended, rougher around the edges. The admission created a moment of perfect stillness between us, both of us aware that we'd just crossed some invisible line into territory that was definitely not covered in the employee handbook. Sarah pulled Mike's chair closer to my desk, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her presence. She reached for my laptop, and when her fingers brushed mine on the keyboard, neither of us pulled away immediately. "Show me the section you're struggling with," she said, and her voice had taken on a different quality, softer, more intimate. Like we were sharing secrets rather than discussing marketing strategies. I pulled up the consumer behavior analysis, but found it hard to concentrate on the spreadsheets with her sitting so close. She smelled like coffee and something floral, and when she leaned forward to read the screen, I could see the curve of her neck, the way her hair fell forward to partially hide her face. "This demographic here," she said, pointing at a cluster of data points, "you've categorized them as aspirational buyers. But I think you're missing something crucial about their motivation." "What do you mean?" "They're not just buying luxury items because they want to appear successful. They're buying them because they want to feel like they matter, like they're worthy of nice things." She turned to look at me, and I was struck by how close her face was to mine. It's about self-worth, not just social status. "How do you know that?" She was quiet for a moment, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the desk surface. "Because I spent most of my 20s buying things I couldn't afford, trying to convince myself I deserved them, trying to fill some hole that had nothing to do with material possessions." The honesty in her voice made something tighten in my chest. "Kind of hole? The kind that comes from never feeling like you're enough, not smart enough, not successful enough, not ... lovable enough." She gave a self-deprecating laugh. "My therapist would have a field day with this conversation." "You see a therapist?" "Started after my husband asked for a divorce 6 months ago," she said, then looked surprised at her own candor. God, I can't believe I just told you that. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Sarah was going through a divorce. The composed professional woman I'd been quietly attracted to for months was dealing with the kind of personal upheaval that explained so much about her late nights at the office. Her comments about empty houses and eating dinner alone. Sorry, I said, and I meant it. That must be incredibly difficult. You know what the worst part is? She said, staring at her hands. Yeah, I'm not even that heartbroken about the marriage ending. We'd been growing apart for years, living like roommates who occasionally shared a bed. The worst part is realizing how alone I've felt even when I wasn't actually alone. I found myself leaning closer, drawn in by her vulnerability. What happened? Nothing dramatic. No affairs, no big fights, no betrayals. Just two people who gradually stopped seeing each other, stopped connecting, stopped trying. She looked up at me with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. She said I'd become too focused on my career, too driven, too unavailable. And the terrible thing is, he was probably right. That doesn't make it your fault, doesn't it? She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, and I had to resist the urge to reach out and comfort her physically. I chose work over date nights. I chose staying late at the office over going home to have dinner with my husband. I chose professional success over personal connection. Maybe you chose those things because the personal connection wasn't fulfilling enough to compete with professional satisfaction, I said carefully. Maybe you stayed late at work because it felt better than going home. She looked at me with something like surprise. You really think so? I think sometimes we're drawn to the places where we feel most valued, most appreciated. If work was giving, use something your marriage ... double quotes. Like what? Like intellectual stimulation, like recognition for your talents, like the feeling that what you do matters. I paused, then decided to risk complete honesty. Like genuine connection with people who actually see you for who you are. The words hung between us, loaded with meaning that went far beyond professional mentorship or friendly advice. We both knew I wasn't just talking about work in general, I was talking about this. This connection we discovered in the quiet intimacy of the empty office. David, she said softly, and my name in her voice sounded different than it ever had before. I know this is complicated, I said quickly, before I could lose my nerve. I know there are all kinds of reasons why this conversation is probably inappropriate. I need you to know that these late nights we've been having, these project collaborations, they're not just work for me. They're the best part of my week. She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if trying to read something written there in a language she wasn't entirely familiar with. Mine too, she admitted finally, and that scares me more than I can tell you. Why does it scare? You, because you're 26 and brilliant and just starting your career. I'm 34 and going through a divorce, and probably the worst possible person for you to get involved with right now. What if I don't care about any of that? You should care about it. You should care about the fact that I'm your manager, that getting involved with me could complicate your career, that I'm emotionally unavailable and probably using you as a distraction from my failing marriage. Are you? I asked. Using me as a distraction? She looked at me for a long moment, her dark eyes searching mine. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know what this is. All I know is that sitting here with you feels more real than anything has felt in months. The admission created a silence between us that felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. We were both aware that we'd moved far beyond professional boundaries into territory that could change everything about our working relationship. We should probably talk about what this means, I said, though part of me wanted to avoid that conversation entirely. To stay suspended in this moment of possibility without having to confront the practical complications. We should, she agreed, but not tonight. Tonight, I just want to finish this project with you and pretend that the rest of the world doesn't exist. I nodded, understanding completely. Okay, but Sarah? Yeah. For what it's worth, I don't think you're emotionally unavailable. I think you're just careful about who you let in. She smiled at that, a soft, grateful expression that made my chest feel warm and tight. Thank you for saying that. I mean it. We spent the next 2 hours working on the consumer psychology section. But the dynamic between us had fundamentally shifted. Every time she reached across me to point at something on the screen, every time our hands accidentally brushed, every time she laughed at something I said it, all felt weighted with new meaning, charged with an awareness that we were attracted to each other in ways that went far beyond professional collaboration. By the time we finished, it was nearly midnight, and the office felt like our own private world. Separate from the complications of hierarchy and appropriate workplace conduct. "Is really good work," Sarah said, reviewing the revised analysis. "Your insights about emotional triggers are spot-on. Henderson's going to be impressed." "Our insights," I corrected. "I couldn't have done this without your help." She saved the document and closed my laptop but made no move to leave. Instead, she sat back in Mike's chair and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "David," she said finally, "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that if this gets too complicated, if it starts affecting your work or your career, you'll tell me. I won't be offended, and I won't make things difficult for you professionally." "I promise," I said, though I couldn't imagine anything. Feeling too complicated when the alternative was going back to our previous professional distance? "But I need you to promise me something too." "What? Promise me you won't use your age, or your divorce, or your position as manager as excuses to push me away. If you want distance, ask for it honestly, but don't hide behind reasons that have nothing to do with how you actually feel." She was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I promise." We gathered our things in comfortable silence, both of us aware that we'd begun something tonight that would require careful navigation in the days to come. As we waited for the elevator, Sarah turned to me and said quietly, "Thank you for listening, for helping with the project, for ... being you. Thank you for trusting me enough to be honest." The elevator arrived and we rode down to the parking garage in silence that felt comfortable rather than awkward. But as we walked toward our cars, I was already wondering what tomorrow would bring. Whether the intimacy we'd discovered tonight would survive the fluorescent lights and professional demands of a normal workday. "Good night, David," she said as we reached her car. "Good night, Sarah." I watched her drive away, then sat in my own car for several minutes, processing what had just happened. In the space of a few hours, my professional relationship with Sarah Martinez had transformed into something far more personal and complicated. I felt exhilarated and nervous in equal measure, aware that we'd crossed a line that would be difficult to uncross. But as I drove home through the empty city streets, I found myself looking forward to tomorrow in a way I hadn't looked forward to anything in months. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made everything feel possible. I got to the office earlier than usual, partly because I'd been too wired to sleep much after my extended evening with Sarah, and partly because I was curious to see how our newfound intimacy would translate to the bright, bustling environment of a normal workday. Mike was already at his desk, sorting through a stack of client files with his usual methodical precision. He looked up when I sat down, coffee in hand, and immediately launched into his typical morning commentary. "You missed quite a show last night," he said, grinning. "Johnson from accounting tried to fix the printer by kicking it and somehow managed to jam it worse than it's ever been jammed. Maintenance had to come in with tools." "Sounds traumatic," I said, logging into my computer and trying to appear as if my entire worldview hadn't shifted in the past 12 hours. "Also, did you notice Sarah seems different lately? It's like happier or something?" Mike lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Jenny from HR thinks she might be seeing someone. Apparently she's been catching Sarah smiling at her phone during meetings. And you know how Sarah never smiles during meetings?" The observation hit me like a small electric shock. Was Sarah smiling at her phone because of texts from me? The possibility sent a warm flutter through my chest, followed immediately by a stab of guilt about deceiving Mike, who had become my closest friend at Henderson Associates. "Maybe she's just having a good week," I said, trying to keep my voice casual while my pulse quickened. Maybe. Or maybe she finally decided to start dating again after her divorce. Good for her, you know? She works too much to be alone all the time. I made some non-committal noise and turned my attention to my computer screen. but I found it difficult to concentrate on emails when part of my mind was occupied with wondering, when I'd see Sarah, how she'd act around me in front of other people. Whether the connection we'd discovered last night would survive the harsh fluorescent lighting and professional obligations of a regular workday. I didn't have to wait long. To find out at 9:30, Sarah emerged from the elevator wearing a charcoal gray dress that I'd never seen before, and carrying herself with a particular kind of confidence that seemed different from her usual professional composure. She walked through the open plan office area with her customary purpose, greeting various colleagues with polite nods and brief smiles, but when she passed my desk, she paused for just a moment longer than necessary. "Good morning, David," she said, and there was something in her tone of warmth, a subtle intimacy that made me look up from my screen. "Morning, Sarah." Our eyes met and held for perhaps 2 seconds longer than was strictly professional. And in that brief moment, I saw acknowledgement of everything that had passed between us the night before. The slight smile that tugged at the corner of her mouth was different from her usual managerial pleasantries, softer, more personal, meant specifically for me. "Could you stop by my office around 10? I'd like to review the consumer analysis before the Henderson presentation." "Of course," I said. And she moved on toward her corner office without any further acknowledgement of our extended evening together. But Mike, who had observed this entire exchange with the oblivious attention to detail that made him both a great friend and a potential complication, immediately leaned over to my desk. "See what I mean?" he said in a stage whisper. "She's definitely in a better mood lately. Did you see that smile? Sarah Martinez actually smiled at you like a human person instead of like a project manager reviewing quarterly reports." "Always been perfectly professional with me," I said, which was technically true while being completely misleading. Professional. Yes, but not, I don't know, warm. Friendly? Like she actually enjoys working with people instead of just tolerating them as necessary components of business operations. I felt heat rise in my cheeks as I realized that Mike's observations were probably accurate. Sarah had been warmer with me lately, more engaged, more present in our interactions. And if Mike had noticed, other people probably had too. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. At 10 o'clock, I knocked on Sarah's office door and was invited in. She was sitting behind her desk, but when she saw me, she stood and moved to the small seating area by the window to chairs arranged around. A low table that she usually reserved for more casual meetings with senior colleagues. "Close the door behind you," she said. "Shh." And something in her tone made my pulse quicken. I did as she asked, then joined her by the window. The morning sunlight streaming through the glass created an intimate atmosphere that felt separate from the rest of the office, even though we were separated from our colleagues by nothing more than glass walls and Venetian blinds. "How are you feeling about last night?" she asked, without preamble, and I appreciated her directness. "Good," I said. "Really good, you?" "Nervous," she admitted. "But good nervous, if that makes sense. Like the kind of nervous you get before doing something you want to do but know might be complicated." I leaned forward in my chair, drawn by her honesty. "What specifically are you nervous about?" "Maintaining professional boundaries during the day while navigating whatever this is between us. It's making sure my feelings don't affect how I manage you or evaluate your work. It's keeping things private without making you feel like I'm ashamed of whatever this becomes." The fact that she'd clearly spent time thinking about the practical implications made me respect her even more. "I've been thinking about that too. I don't want you to worry about my work performance. If anything, I'm more motivated than ever." She smiled at that. "The consumer analysis you finished last night was excellent. Some of the best work I've seen from anyone at your level." That was a collaborative effort. And I enjoyed the collaboration more than I probably should have. She paused, then added more quietly, "I enjoyed all of it more than I should have." The admission hung between us, creating a moment of perfect understanding. We both knew we were talking about more than just work. "Sarah," I said, and she looked at me with an expression that was open, vulnerable, completely different from her usual managerial composure. "Yeah. I want you to know that whatever complications come from this, I'm willing to navigate them. I'm not going to panic and create drama, and I'm not going to expect more than you're comfortable giving." What if I don't know what I'm comfortable giving yet, and we figure it out as we go? She nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. I'd like that. It's figuring it out as we go. So what does that look like, practically speaking? Honestly, I have no idea. Never been in a situation like this before. She laughed softly. I've never been attracted to someone I supervise. Never mixed personal feelings with professional responsibilities. I'm making this up as I go along. That makes two of us. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us processing the magnitude of what we were attempting. Then Sarah glanced at her watch and sighed. I have a meeting in 5 minutes, and you probably need to get back to Mike before he starts wondering what's taking so long. Right. I stood to leave, then paused at the door. Sarah? Yes, thank you. For being honest about this. For not pretending last night didn't happen. Thank you for making it easy to be honest. I left her office feeling like I was walking on air, hyper-aware of every interaction, every glance, every moment of proximity between us throughout the rest of the day. And I began to notice things I'd missed before, the way Sarah's eyes would find mine across the office during meetings, the way she'd linger near my desk when discussing projects with Mike, the way she'd smile when she thought no one was looking. By the end of the day, I was convinced that we were managing the transition well, maintaining professional boundaries while acknowledging the personal connection that had developed between us. But as I packed up my things to leave, Mike made an observation. That sent a chill of worry through me. You know what's weird? He said, pulling on his jacket. I could have sworn I saw Sarah's car in the parking garage when I left last night around 10:30. But that couldn't be right, because she usually leaves by 7. Maybe she was working on something important, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Yeah, probably. Or maybe she really is seeing someone and had a late dinner date. He grinned. Good for her either way. She deserves to be happy. I agreed wholeheartedly, but Mike's observation reminded me that we'd need to be more careful about maintaining the appearance of professional distance. The last thing I wanted was for office gossip to complicate Sarah's career or put her in an uncomfortable position with senior management. As I walked to my car, I found myself looking forward to whatever came next, but also aware that we'd entered territory that would require careful navigation. The connection between Sarah and me was real, powerful, potentially transformative for both of us, but it was also fragile, complicated and fraught with professional and personal risks that we'd need to manage with considerable care. The thought should have been daunting. Instead, as I drove home through the evening traffic, I found myself more excited about going to work tomorrow than I'd been about anything in months. Over the next 3 weeks, our late-night work sessions evolved from occasional collaborations into something that felt almost ritualistic. I found myself volunteering for projects that would require Sarah's input, and she seemed to find reasons to keep me involved in initiatives that could have been handled by more senior staff. We developed an unspoken understanding. When the office emptied around 6 or 7 p.m., we'd find reasons to stay. You don't have to keep working late just because I do, Sarah said one Thursday evening as we spread marketing reports across the conference table. But her tone suggested she hoped I'd disagree. Not working late because you are, I replied, moving my chair closer to review a quarterly projection. I'm working late because I want to be here. The honesty in my voice made her look up from the spreadsheets, and for a moment we just studied each other across the scattered papers. These moments of direct acknowledgement had become more frequent brief instances, where we'd drop the pretense of pure professionalism and recognize what was really happening between us. David, she said softly, what are we doing? Becoming friends, I said, though we both knew it was more complicated than that. Really good friends who happen to work together. Is that what you call it when you know someone's coffee order by heart and look forward to seeing them more than anyone else in your life? The question hung between us, loaded with implications neither of us was quite ready to address directly. Because she was right, I did know that she preferred her coffee black in the morning but would add cream if she was drinking it after 8 p.m. I did look forward to our evening conversations more than dates, more than time with other friends, more than almost anything else in my week. Maybe friendship isn't the right word, I admitted. Maybe not. These conversations had become our new normal, dancing around the edges of deeper feelings. While sharing increasingly personal details about our lives, I learned that Sarah had wanted to be a writer before she'd gotten practical about career prospects, that she still wrote poetry sometimes when she couldn't sleep, that her divorce had been finalized 2 weeks ago, but she hadn't told anyone at work yet. "I keep expecting to feel relieved," she said one night as we worked on a client presentation, "but mostly I just feel ... unmoored. Like I spent so many years defining myself as half of a couple that I'm not sure who I am on my own." "What do you want to be?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, pen poised over a strategy document. "I want to be someone who doesn't eat dinner while checking emails. Someone who travels somewhere just because it's beautiful, not because there's a business conference there. Someone who..." She trailed off, looking almost embarrassed. "Someone who... what?" "Someone who falls in love again. Not the practical, we should probably get married kind of love I had with my ex-husband. The kind that makes you stupid and reckless and willing to reorganize your whole life around another person." The admission hit me like a physical force, making it difficult to breathe normally, because I was starting to suspect that I was already falling in love with her in exactly the way she'd described, stupid and reckless and completely willing to reorganize my life around her schedule, her needs, her presence in return. I found myself sharing insecurities I'd never voiced to anyone, my fear that I'd chosen marketing because it seemed safe rather than because I was passionate about it. My worry that I was drifting through my 20s without any real direction or purpose, my suspicion that most of my college friends were already surpassing me professionally and personally. "You're 26, Sarah said when I voiced these concerns. "You're supposed to be figuring things out, not having everything already decided. You seem like you have everything figured out. I seem like I'm good at pretending I have things figured out. There is a difference." She moved closer to point at something on my laptop screen. And I caught her familiar scent coffee and that subtle perfume that made me hyper-aware of her proximity. "The truth is, I'm probably more lost now than you are. At least you're being honest about not knowing what you want. I spent 8 years convincing myself I wanted a marriage that made me miserable. These conversations created an intimacy that went far beyond professional collaboration. It began to occupy the same space with an ease that felt natural, inevitable. Sarah would lean over my shoulder to read something on my screen, her hand resting lightly on my chair back. I'd reach across, her to grab a file, letting my arm brush against hers without either of us pulling away. We'd work in comfortable silence, aware of each other's breathing, each other's movements, the warmth that seemed to generate in the space between us. One evening, as we sat side by side reviewing client feedback, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it and made a small sound of frustration. "Everything okay?" I asked. "My lawyer. More paperwork to sign, more details to finalize. Sometimes I feel like my divorce is going to drag on forever." Without thinking, I reached over and covered her hand with mine. "It'll be over soon. And then you can start figuring out who you want to be next." She turned her hand palm up, so our fingers were interlaced, and we sat like that for several heartbeats, connected in a way that was definitely not professional. It's definitely not appropriate, definitely the kind of physical contact that could complicate everything. But neither of us pulled away. The following Monday, Mike bounded over to our desk area with the kind of enthusiasm that usually signaled trouble. "Team coffee. Run," he announced. "That new place on 5th Street finally opened, and I heard they have some kind of specialty drink that's supposed to be amazing. Who's in?" Several of our colleagues immediately voiced interest, and I was about to decline when Mike turned to me with expectant eyes. "David, you're definitely coming. And Sarah," he called toward her office, "you should join us. You never leave the building during lunch anymore." I felt a small spike of panic as Sarah emerged from her office, clearly. Considering Mike's invitation, we'd been so careful about maintaining professional distance during business hours, about not spending too much visible time together, about keeping our growing intimacy confined to after-hours work sessions. I really should finish this client. "Proposal?" Sarah said, and I felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. "Come on, Mike," insisted. "You work too hard. One coffee isn't going to derail your productivity for the entire day." I watched Sarah weigh the decision, Saw the moment when she realized that declining might seem strange, might draw the kind of attention we'd been trying to avoid. "All right," she said finally, "but just a quick coffee. I really do need to finish this proposal today." The walk to the coffee shop was an exercise in careful choreography. I found myself hyper-aware of where Sarah was in our group, making sure not to walk too close to her, not to direct too much conversation her way, not to exhibit any of the familiarity that had developed between us over the past few weeks. But the coffee shop presented a new challenge. It was small, crowded, with limited seating that forced our group into closer quarters than I'd anticipated. Somehow, Sarah and I ended up at the same small table, sitting across from each other while Mike and our other colleagues occupied nearby seats. "This is nice," Sarah said, looking around at the exposed brick walls and industrial light fixtures. "I should get out of the office more often." "You should," I agreed, trying to keep my tone casual despite the fact that being across from her, in this intimate setting, felt almost unbearably charged with meaning. She ordered her coffee black, because it was before 8 p.m. when she smiled at the barista. I found myself studying the way her face transformed when she was relaxed, unguarded, not performing her role as senior project manager Sarah Martinez. "You're staring," she said quietly, and I realized she was right. "Sorry, I was just thinking about the client proposal you mentioned. Do you need help with the market analysis section?" It was a transparent attempt to redirect our conversation towards safe professional territory. But Mike overheard and immediately inserted himself into the discussion. "Are you talking about the Morrison account? Because I have some thoughts about their demographic targeting that might be useful." For the next 20 minutes, our personal conversation was effectively hijacked by shop talk, which should have felt safer, but somehow didn't. Because every time Sarah made a point about consumer behavior, every time she laughed at something Mike said, every time she absently stirred her coffee while listening to our colleagues discuss quarterly projections, I found myself falling a little deeper into whatever this was between us. When we finally got up to leave, there was a moment of confusion about who was paying for what. And in the shuffle of credit cards and cash, Sarah ended up standing directly beside me at the counter. "Was fun," she said quietly, so only I could hear. I forget sometimes how much I enjoy just being around people, being around you specifically." The admission was soft, intimate, completely inappropriate for our current setting. I looked around to make sure Mike and our other colleagues were occupied with their own conversations, then leaned slightly closer to her. "I know what you mean. We should be more careful," she whispered, but she didn't move away from me. Mike is observant, and I think he's starting to notice that we spend a lot of time together. "What kind of things is he noticing?" he asked. "Me yesterday, if I was mentoring you specifically, because he said you've seemed happier and more engaged at work lately." She paused. "He also mentioned that your work quality has improved significantly over the past month." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "Has it? You know it has? You've been doing some of the best analysis I've seen from anyone at your level." "But David ... yeah. We can't let people think there's something unprofessional happening between us. Even if there is." It's the phrase, "even if there is," hit me like a small electric shock. It was the closest Sarah had come to directly acknowledging that our relationship had moved beyond professional boundaries into territory that was personal, intimate, potentially romantic. "So what do you suggest?" "I think we should be more careful about how much time we spend together during business hours. Less collaboration on projects that don't specifically require my input, fewer visits to my office, more ... distance." Word distance felt like a physical blow, even though I understood the logic behind it. "Okay," I said. "But Sarah, yeah, it doesn't change anything about after hours, does it? About our evening work sessions?" She looked at me with an expression that was warm, grateful, maybe a little relieved. "No, it doesn't change anything about after hours." As we walked back to the office with Mike and our colleagues, I found myself acutely aware of the space between Sarah and me. The careful way we avoided too much eye contact, the professional tone we maintained despite the intimate conversation we'd just shared, but I was also aware of something else, a thrill of excitement about the secrecy, about having something private and meaningful that existed separate from our public professional relationship. The need for discretion made everything feel more significant, more charged with possibility. It also made me feel guilty about deceiving Mike, who continued to chatter about coffee shops and client proposals, completely unaware that his two colleagues were navigating something far more complicated than he realized. That evening, I was getting ready for bed when my phone rang. Sarah's name on the caller ID made my pulse quicken. We'd exchanged numbers weeks ago for project coordination, but she'd never called me at home before. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," she said when I answered, and I could hear something strained in her voice. "I know we agreed to be more careful about boundaries, but what's wrong? I'm sitting here with a stack of divorce paperwork that my lawyer needs signed and notarized by tomorrow, and I can't. I'm having some kind of panic attack or something. My hands are shaking and I can't focus, and I know this is completely inappropriate, but you're the only person I wanted to call." The vulnerability in her voice cut straight through any concerns I might have had about professional appropriateness or maintaining careful boundaries. "Where are you?" I asked, already reaching for my car keys. "At home, but David, you don't need to text me your address. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive to Sarah's house gave me time to process what I was doing, going to my manager's home at nearly 11 p.m. to provide emotional support. During a personal crisis, it was exactly the kind of boundary crossing that could complicate both our careers and our relationship. But when Sarah opened her front door, looking vulnerable and grateful and more beautiful than I'd ever seen her, I knew I'd made the right decision. "Thank you for coming," she said, leading me into her living room. "I know this is crazy, but I didn't know who else to call." "It's not crazy. What can I do to help?" She gestured toward a coffee table covered with legal documents. "I need to sign about 15 different papers, but every time I start reading them, I feel like I can't breathe. It's like looking at the official documentation of my failure as a human being." I sat down beside her on the couch, close enough that our knees touched. "This isn't failure, Sarah. This is you being brave enough to leave a situation that wasn't making you happy. Then why does it feel like I'm giving up on everything I thought I wanted? Because endings are hard, even when they're the right choice, even when they lead to something better." She looked at me then with an expression that was so open, so unguarded, that I felt something shift in my chest. What if there isn't something better? What if I just spent 8 years with the only person who's ever going to love me, and I threw it away because I was too selfish to appreciate what I had? Do you really believe that? I don't know what I believe anymore. I reached over and took her hand, the way I had in the office a few days earlier. This time the gesture felt more significant, weighted with meaning that went beyond simple comfort. "Sarah, look at me." She did. "You're extraordinary. You're brilliant and funny and kind, and any man would be lucky to be loved by you. If your ex-husband didn't appreciate what he had, that says something about his limitations, not yours." Something changed in her expression, a softness, a gratitude, vulnerability that made the air between us feel charged with possibility. "David," she said quietly, and my name in her voice sounded different than it ever had before. "Yeah, this probably isn't smart, but I need you to know that having you in my life has been the best thing that's happened to me in months, maybe years." The admission hit me like a physical force.
"Sarah,
I know it's complicated. I know there are all kinds of reasons why this is inappropriate and potentially disastrous for both of us. But sitting here with you feels more right than anything felt in my marriage for the last 3 years." I found myself leaning closer to her, drawn by the honesty in her voice, the way she was looking at me like I was something precious and unexpected. "It feels right to me too," I said. "What are we doing here?" "I think we're falling for each other." The words hung between us, finally giving voice to what we'd both been feeling but hadn't dared to articulate.
Ow.
Sarah's breath caught slightly, and I saw something kindle in her eyes. "This is going to complicate everything," she whispered. "Probably. Could be a disaster. It could be. Are you willing to risk that?" I reached up and touched her face gently, brushing my thumb across her cheek. "For this? For you? Yes." She leaned into my touch, closing her eyes as if she was memorizing the sensation. When she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "Help me sign these papers," she said, "and then help me figure out what comes next." We spent the next hour working through the legal documents together. I read each section aloud while Sarah signed where indicated. Providing emotional support and practical assistance in equal measure. But underneath the mundane task of paperwork, there was an electric current of awareness, the knowledge that we'd just acknowledged. Feelings that would change everything about our relationship when the last document was signed and witnessed. Sarah leaned back against the couch and looked at me with an expression that was grateful, exhausted, and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Thank you," she said, "for coming here, for helping me get through this, for ... For what? For making me feel like I'm worth taking a risk for." 2 weeks later, Henderson Associates threw its quarterly office party, a mandatory social event that everyone attended but no one particularly enjoyed. I'd been looking forward to it only because it meant I'd get to see Sarah in a social setting, away from the careful professional distance we'd been maintaining during business hours. The party was held in our building's conference room, decorated with generic corporate celebration materials and catered with the kind of appetizers that looked impressive but tasted like cardboard. I stood near the refreshment table, making small talk with Mike and some colleagues from accounting. But my attention was focused on Sarah across the room. She was wearing a navy blue dress that I'd never seen before, her hair pulled back in a way that highlighted the elegant line of her neck. She moved through the party with her usual professional grace, making appropriate conversation with senior management and key clients. But I caught her glancing in my direction more than once. "Earth to David," Mike said, nudging my shoulder. "You're staring into space like you're having some kind of existential crisis." "Sorry, just thinking about the Morrison presentation next week." "At a party? Man, you really are turning into a workaholic. Sarah's rubbing off on you." The comment made me wonder if Mike was starting to suspect something about the nature of my relationship with Sarah, but his expression remained cheerfully oblivious. "Speaking of Sarah," he continued, "doesn't she seem different to you lately? More relaxed, maybe? Like she's actually enjoying herself instead of just going through the motions?" I glanced across the room to where Sarah was laughing at something Henderson was saying, and Mike was right. She did seem more relaxed, more genuinely present than she'd been in our previous office social events. "Maybe she's just adjusting to being divorced," I said carefully. "Wait, Sarah got divorced? When did that happen?" I realized I'd revealed information that wasn't public knowledge. That Sarah hadn't shared her personal situation with our colleagues. I think it was recent. She mentioned it in passing during a project meeting. Mike looked intrigued by this development. I quickly changed the subject before he could ask more questions about Sarah's personal life. The party continued around us colleagues, making forced conversation, senior management networking with clients, the usual choreography of corporate social events. But I found it difficult to concentrate on anything except Sarah's presence across the room and the growing desire to find some way to be alone with her. My opportunity came when I noticed Sarah slip out of the main party area, presumably heading to the smaller conference room where we'd been working on the Morrison presentation earlier that week. After waiting a few minutes to avoid drawing attention, followed her. I found her standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights with a glass of wine in her hand. She'd kicked off her heels and was standing in her stocking feet, which somehow made her seem more approachable, more human, escaping the festivities. I asked softly. She turned at the sound of my voice, and her face lit up with a smile that was completely different from her professional party smile. "I needed a break from making small talk about quarterly projections," she said. "What's your excuse? I saw you leave and thought you might want some company. I always want your company." The admission was simple, direct, loaded with meaning, that made the air between us feel charged with possibility. I moved closer to where she stood by the windows, close enough that I could smell her perfume, close enough that I could see the way the city lights reflected in her dark eyes. "You look beautiful tonight," I said, and meant it completely. "David," she said, and there was something in her voice that sounded like warning and invitation at the same time. I know this is complicated. I know we're supposed to be careful. I know there are all kinds of reasons why this is probably a terrible idea, but I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop wanting to be close to you. I can't stop feeling like this thing between us is the most real thing in my life right now." She set down her wine glass and turned to face me fully, her expression serious, vulnerable, completely unguarded. I feel the same way, she admitted. And it scares me more than I can tell you. Why does it scare you? Because I don't trust my judgment anymore. Because my last relationship was such a disaster that I'm not sure. I know the difference between genuine connection and just neediness, loneliness, the desire to feel wanted by someone. I stepped closer, close enough that there were only inches between us. What does this feel like to you? Right now, in this moment. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine as if she was trying to read something written there in a language she was still learning. It feels like the beginning of something that could change everything, she said quietly. Is that what you want? Something that could change everything? Instead of answering with words, she reached up and touched my face gently, the same gesture I'd made at her house the night I helped her sign the divorce papers. Her touch was soft, tentative, full of question and possibility. I leaned into her touch, then covered her hand with mine, holding it against my cheek as I looked into her eyes. Sarah, I said softly. Yeah, I'm going to kiss you now unless you tell me not to. She was quiet for a moment, her thumb brushing across my cheek as she studied my face. Then she said, I should tell you not to. But are you going to? No. I leaned down slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she rose up to meet me. Her eyes fluttering closed as the distance between us disappeared. Our lips were perhaps an inch apart. When the conference room door opened and the janitor walked in, pushing his cleaning cart and humming tunelessly to himself, Sarah and I sprang apart as if we'd been electrocuted. Both of us breathing hard and staring at each other with expressions of shock, frustration, and nervous laughter. Evening. Folks, the janitor said cheerfully, apparently oblivious to what he'd interrupted. Just need to empty the trash bins. Don't mind me, of course, Sarah said, her voice slightly breathless. She stepped back from me and smoothed down her dress, trying to regain her composure. We should probably rejoin the others anyway. I nodded. Though every fiber of my being wanted to ask the janitor to come back later to finish what Sarah and I had started, to finally cross the line we'd been approaching for weeks, but the moment was gone, interrupted by the mundane reality of office, maintenance, and the reminder that we were, technically, at a work function where anyone could walk in on us at any time. Yes, I managed to say. Should probably get back to the party. Sarah slipped her shoes back on and picked up her wine glass, but as we moved toward the door, she paused and looked back at me. David, yeah, this conversation isn't over. The promise in her voice sent heat coursing through my veins. No, it's not. As we rejoined the party, both of us trying to appear casual despite the fact that we'd nearly kissed in a conference room at a work function, I found myself more aware than ever of the electric tension that existed between us. Laughed at someone else's joke every time she made eye contact with me across the room. Every time she moved through the party with that particular grace that made her seem untouchable and completely desirable at the same time. All of it felt charged with the memory of how close we'd come to finally acknowledging the physical attraction that had been building between us for weeks. The almost kiss had changed something. It's fundamental about our relationship. We'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, acknowledged desires that couldn't be unacknowledged. Whatever happened next would have to address the fact that we wanted each other in ways that went far beyond professional collaboration or even emotional connection. And as I watched Sarah navigate the rest of the party with professional skill, while occasionally catching my eye with looks that promised continued conversation, I knew that we were rapidly approaching a moment when we'd have to decide what we wanted this relationship to become, what we were willing to risk to make. It happened. The Morrison deadline hit us like a freight train. 3 weeks of preparation compressed into 72 frantic hours when the client moved up their presentation date. I found Sarah in her office at nearly midnight on Tuesday, surrounded by scattered reports, her usually perfect composure completely shattered. I can't do this anymore, she said when she saw me, her voice breaking. I'm so tired of pretending I have everything under control when I feel like I'm drowning. Professional success, personal emptiness. I'm trapped between who I'm supposed to be and who I actually am. I closed the door behind me and moved to where she sat, tears threatening to spill over. Sarah. I know this is complicated, she continued, looking up at me with desperate honesty, but I can't pretend I don't feel this anymore. I can't pretend that seeing you every day isn't the only thing keeping me sane. Without thinking, I reached for her hands, pulling her up from her chair. Sarah, I need to tell you something. What? I've been staying late every night for months, hoping you'd need help with something, hoping for an excuse to be alone with you. The words tumbled out faster than I could stop them. These late nights we have, they're not work for me anymore. They're the best part of my entire day. Her breath caught. David, I look forward to seeing you more than anything else in my life. I think about you when I'm not here. As she stepped closer, so close I could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. I do too. God, I look forward to our conversations more than anything else in my world. The admission hung between us for one perfect, suspended moment. Then Sarah reached up, touched my face gently, and whispered, "This is probably crazy, but I..." Leaned down and kissed her, soft and tentative at first, then deeper when she responded by pulling me closer. Her lips were warm, tasting faintly of coffee and possibility. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against mine. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, this is happening. We need to talk about what this means, Sarah," said, though neither of us moved away from the other. I nodded, still holding her close. "I know there are risks. Your position, my career, the age difference. The age difference doesn't matter to me if it doesn't matter to you. It doesn't. Sarah, I need you to know this isn't just attraction for me. This isn't some crush on my older boss. What I feel for you is real, and it's not going anywhere." She studied my face carefully. "What I feel for you is real too. But we have to be careful. No one can know about this. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. I can handle that. Stolen moments, secret texts, pretending we're just colleagues when people are watching. Can you really handle that?" I kissed her forehead softly. "I can handle anything if it means I get to have this with you." Over the following weeks, we developed an intricate dance of secrecy, coded text messages about project updates that were really just ways to say good morning, brief touches when passing files. The electric thrill of shared glances across meeting rooms, the satisfaction of our secret was intoxicating, but so was the weight of deception. Every time Mike made innocent observations about Sarah seeming happier, every time we had to maintain professional distance while wanting nothing more than to be close to each other, I felt the complexity of what we'd chosen. But late at night, when the office emptied and Sarah would appear at my desk with coffee and that smile that was meant only for me, none of the complications mattered. We'd found something real in the most unlikely place, and despite every reason it shouldn't work, it was working. "Are you okay with this?" she asked one evening, as we worked side by side, her hand resting on my arm. "With what? With us being a secret? With having to hide something that makes you happy?" I turned to look at her brilliant, beautiful, vulnerable. Sarah, who'd trusted me with her heart, despite every professional and personal reason not to. "I'd rather have you as a secret than not have you at all," I said, and meant it completely. She smiled, leaning over to kiss me softly. "Good, because I'm not ready to share you with the world yet either."